Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network on this Tuesday, May 20th. Just talked about some potential bounce back candidates for this upcoming season. Gonna switch gears. Gonna talk about, could there be no more noon games in Ohio Stadium? That's what members of the Ohio General Assembly want to do. They are very concerned about their football. If you don't know anything about the state of Ohio, it's a football crazy state. That's number one. Football is king. And this is a bill that I think kind of showcases that. So a bill has been introduced in the Ohio State Legislature in the General Assembly to prohibit Ohio State and other state schools, not just Ohio State, from playing most of its home games before 3:30 p.m. So, under the terms of the proposal by Representative Tex Fisher from Boardman, Ohio, games including at least one state school and games including top 10 teams would be prohibited from starting earlier than the mid-afternoon. With one exception, however. Division B of the section does not apply if an earlier start time of a college football game between two teams is a college football tradition. And for that purpose, a college football tradition was defined as a start time of a game between teams of two institutions whose football teams having competed against each other of at least 50 times, and the start time has been the same time for at least 95% of those games. So that provision, in general, that's just talking about Ohio State, Michigan. That's pretty clear there. That's an annual rivalry that always is played at noon, so it would exempt that game from being played at noon. However, pretty much every other game in the Ohio State Stadium would not be played at noon if it was a top 10 matchup. This is something that's really interesting. It would affect the Texas-Ohio State game this year, as that's being played at noon right now, but it's something that's kind of interesting. This bill comes with a bunch of consternation among Ohio State fans, pretty much with the Big Ten's media rights contract with Fox. So because of Big Noon Saturday, which Fox debuted that, when they debuted it, it was kind of a way for the network to air a marquee matchup, during what's pretty much kind of a barer early state, traditionally, rather than having to compete with the SEC's long-standing 3:30 game on CBS, which now CBS primarily airs a Big Ten game at 3:30 as part of a new media rights deal with that conference, or having to compete with ESPN's primetime night matchup on ESPN ABC. And they kind of added some pageantry to the pre-show kickoff. They added Big Noon kickoff, kind of doing the same thing that ESPN does with College Game Day. I'm not a fan of Big Noon kickoff. I think it's pretty much a ripoff of College Game Day. Doesn't give the same experience to me. But because of Big Noon Saturday, Fox essentially gets the pick of the conference's top matchup every weekend in the football season. And almost always they place that marquee game of the week in that Big Noon Saturday kind of slot. With other top games around the country later in the day, it just kind of makes sense that they've gotten strong ratings in that slot, so they've continued that matchup. However, this time slot heavily features Ohio State, and it's something that Ohio State fans have hated for years, but 7 of the Buckeyes' 12 regular season games in 2024 were at noon Eastern Time. 6 of those games were at home. That included marquee matchups versus Indiana, Penn State, Michigan, all were on Fox at noon. It's something that's drawn frustration from fans that attend these games for a bunch of reasons, mostly including the inability to tailgate throughout the day. But Fox is a huge reason why Ohio State, why other Big Ten schools get so much money per year. It's kind of hard to see Ohio State other Big Ten schools trading less TV money for fewer early kickoffs. However, kind of fun to speculate about. The bill to ban early kickoffs, it also came just months after a bill was introduced in the Ohio State legislature to ban flag planting at a stadium, which came from Michigan's flag planting display after they beat Ohio State this year, 13-10 in Ohio Stadium in Columbus. Ohio State, obviously, they got the final laugh. They won the national championship, but that bill came right after that game. So this is something that, hey, Ohio representatives, I guess, just really like their Ohio State football. If somehow this bill got passed, the Ohio Attorney General would slap a $10 million fine against either the host team's athletic conference or the television network that was broadcasting the game, whichever party scheduled the earlier start time. That was the language in the actual bill. So, essentially, if Ohio State had, look at the Texas matchup, right? This is going to be a top 10 matchup in that noon slot. This bill, essentially, if it was passed, the Attorney General would fine either the Big Ten or Fox here for this matchup. I don't know how this would be enforced, frankly, but it's kind of something that's fun to speculate on, I think, a little bit. Ohio State fans, they do have kind of a legitimate gripe. They have played 35 noon games since the start of the 2019 season, including those 7 last year on their way to the national championship. Last season, each of Ohio State's final 6 regular season home games began at noon, 3 of those coming at home. And this is something that's just kind of interesting. Of note, last year in 24, there was only one home game that would have fallen under this criteria, which was the November 23rd meeting with Indiana, a game where Ohio State and Indiana were both ranked in the top 5. Ohio State was 2, Indiana was 5. And then Ohio State only played one other top 10 team in the noon slot, which was against Penn State. However, that was on the road, so a little bit different. But I don't know. Ohio seems to really love their Ohio State football. And hey, maybe there's a matchup down the road where Bowling Green is a top 10 team and they play somebody, and that falls under this category. When I first saw the kind of headlines, that's what my question was how would this enforce, I guess, across all institutions? Because it doesn't really make sense to limit the other state schools being, OU, Miami, Toledo, Akron, Kent State, Bowling Green. If those schools couldn't play at noon, it didn't really make a lot of sense to me just because there's not as much flexibility in those schedules. But the way they've kind of written it in, it pretty much makes it seem like this is just a bill for Ohio State. It's kind of interesting. I don't know. I think this is a bill that shouldn't pass, most likely. Even if it did, I don't know how it's really enforceable for Ohio or for the Attorney General. How would they enforce this against the Big Ten, against Fox? I'm not sure. I don't really think they would probably be able to, but it's kind of fun to just speculate about and think of, hey, maybe this could actually happen. If it did, though, would it actually affect Fox moving them? Would they move Ohio State off of that noon slot just because of this fine, even though Ohio State most likely would draw the most eyeballs for their TV ratings for that noon slot? Would that fine, the potential fine, be enough for Fox or for the Big Ten to move off of Ohio State in one of those primetime slots on Big Noon Saturday? I don't know. I probably doubt it would. I think the TV ratings would most likely trump whatever this fine would be from the Ohio Attorney General, but I'm not sure. Maybe it would force Fox or the Big Ten to move off of Ohio State and maybe a matchup of Ohio State, Indiana, something like that. Maybe they move that to later in the day. I don't know. I kind of would doubt that. I think if Ohio State's there, if there's a home game in Ohio Stadium where it's a marquee matchup, there's no way Fox isn't putting them in that primetime slot for them, which is that noon slot. I just don't think that would make a lot of sense from Fox's point of view. But this was a little fun segment I just kind of wanted to speculate about. We're going to take another short break now. When we come back, we're going to finish with a continuation of my SEC rankings, kind of that middle tier of the conference, and where I think those schools are. But stick with us. We'll be right back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.